Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Nick, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to hear your story, excited to share your story. Before we kick off, where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
Los Angeles, California.
Nice, man. Nice.
Absolutely.
You got good weather year long. Envious of that.
Mostly,
it's actually where I was. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a little gray and cloudy and cold today, but usually it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, better than snowy, icy,
yes,
rainy and such.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's great, man. That's awesome. Cool. So let's kick off with your formal introduction. Nicholas Lambert served 6 years active duty in the U.S. Army as a field artillery officer, serving in the 4th Infantry Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. Nicholas is a recipient of the Combat Action Badge, Bronze Star, and Army Commendation Medal. Today, Nicholas is the Vice President of Construction at Genesis Capital. I'm really excited to dig into these medals and just recipients of awards that you received. Before we get there, let's start off with childhood. As you know, we're going to do life stories. So where'd you grow up? What in childhood led you to service?
Yeah, absolutely. And a great question. I grew up in California, northern part, San Francisco Bay Area. Didn't really enjoy it at the time, but in hindsight, I really kind of regret not living there anymore. But it was what it was as a kid. But I'd always had a strong connection to the military. I was the kid that was always, playing toy soldier, dressing up in Army gear for Halloween. My dad was in the reserves, had several other family members who had served in the military. So that kind of started it for me. I was a teenager. I was in high school for 9/11. So that also happened. And so that sort of was a catalyst in sort of those very developmental years of my life to kind of inspire me to do something more as well. I initially had planned on enlisting, right after high school. My parents kind of, for lack of a better word, persuaded me not to do that, and instead went to college, got my degree, and then went in after that as an officer through officer candidate school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And that's what kicked it off. It was just sort of a long upbringing of wanting to serve. My parents were both in the medical field. Service was something that was just sort of always a part of our family. So I knew I wanted to do that. I kind of wanted some adventure. I knew kind of going in, I never really wanted it to be a career thing. I was not going to do 25, 30 years in the Army. I had an agenda. I wanted to do real estate stuff. I had other things I wanted to do. It was both a means to an end and sort of a way to do my bit, serve, and participate in something a little bit bigger than myself. And I'm immensely glad that I did. I mean, it was still to this day the best experience of my life. The closest friends and relationships I have came from that field and that period of time in my life. And I miss it every day. I would do it again in a heartbeat if I could. I wouldn't change a thing about it. And, it was just really something that really shaped me into who I am now and just gave me so many great memories, skills, experiences, and just things that I take with me every day still. And there's things that I picked up, that I still use in my day-to-day constantly. So, growing up, that's always what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do it. Several of my friends kind of were on the same path from high school, so we all served, not together, somewhat into the Navy, the Air Force, other services, but we all did it together. We all got out together. Several of us are in real estate now, so it's just kind of funny how it all comes sort of full circle in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I always love to hear that kind of hindsight feedback that you're grateful for your service, wouldn't change it for anything. That's, I think, a very powerful statement for a lot of people to hear for many reasons, right? I'm kind of curious before we kind of continue into your service. When you were in university, what was like your mindset, generally speaking? Like, was it just steady? Okay, I know I'm graduating. I'm going to go into service. Like, at what point in your degree did you actually enlist?
I mean, I think I knew during the duration of my 4-year college experience, I kind of knew that was going to be the end result. I think maybe in my freshman year, there was potentially some ambiguity. I was still kind of trying to sort myself out a little bit. But I really started in earnest probably my junior year of starting the applications, doing the testing, and all the things involved to get accepted into the program. And that's kind of when I really, knew it was going to happen. I had several professors at school who were Vietnam veterans. We actually had several military-themed classes. It was a small liberal arts college where I went, but we had, a class on military strategy and arms control. We had a class on warfare. We had a summer session that took us out to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin for the day and got to see a bunch of Army stuff and training going on. Little did I know that I'd go through several rotations there myself later on, but it was cool to see it then, for the first time. And so I had a lot of professors too that were sort of shaping me into that. I was a political science major as well, so we were kind of just dealing with a lot of current events and things. And obviously, this was 2006, 2007. So, the Iraq War was still in full swing. Afghanistan was in full swing during that period. It was pretty much the number one news topic during those days. So it was always kind of front and center. And yeah, I started in earnest my junior year, and probably halfway through my senior year, I'd finished with my recruiter. All of the, the applications, the background checks, the testing, all of that stuff was done. I got offered, a spot at officer school, and I accepted, and then finished my final semester of my senior year. And probably a couple of weeks after graduation, I was on a plane and then a bus, and then getting my head shaved and yelled at, and it started the whole process. So, it just kind of just fell together, and it was interesting.
Yeah. So in enlisting, were you specifically aiming for officer track, or was it because you were finishing your degree?
When I did my enlistment, it was specifically to go to officer school and become, get commissioned as a lieutenant. Now that was not, guaranteed with my contract. That was, of course, predicated on me completing the training and passing and all of that. Had I not, I would have gone a different path in the Army, but that was certainly my goal. Since I had a degree, I was qualified to go in as a get commissioned as an officer straight up from day one. So that's the path I took. Part of me, kind of wishes I'd done a few years enlisted. I served with a lot of officers that did a few years enlisted prior to, and it definitely made them better in a lot of aspects, just in terms of, obviously they had more knowledge than we do, but they see things from a different side. And I think having that skill set is beneficial. I didn't benefit from it, but, I do think there is certainly benefit to that, but that's just not the path that I took.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, depending on kind of how you answered that timeline, right, of when you went into officer school. I was gonna ask, like, if it was weird to enlist, given obviously you had a different age from, I think what the average would have probably been 18, more or less, right? So going straight to officer school, I think that probably put you in an age demographic that was similar to yours.
It was different, right? So I went to basic training with a whole smattering of people, right? They had people like in my program who were going to go in as officers, and then they had, the straight 17, 18-year-olds straight out of high school who are just joining and doing that, right? And we were all in the same basic training company together. So there were guys that were 17. I was 22, about to turn 23. We had a guy that was 40. So, and everything in between, right? So I was definitely, the majority were young, okay? They were definitely kids. 17, 18, 19 was the bulk of it. There were probably 10 of us that were like me that just got out of college, 22, 23, and then, the older guys, a couple mid-30s, and then 40-year-old. So, and he passed. He succeeded everything. He made it all the way through. It was awesome. So we were super proud of that guy. He was awesome.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess walk us through that process, right? So finish school, enlist, you get to basic training. Where's that, and how was that for you?
Yeah, so Fort Benning, Georgia. It was Fort Benning. I believe it's now called Fort Moore. It was renamed recently. It was great. I spent my first year in the Army at Fort Benning. It was 9 weeks of basic training, and then officer school was, 5 months, maybe, give or take. And then there was a couple-month program after that was sort of just standard infantry skills that were covered in the officer program, but they just wanted to give us a little bit more experience with some, house clearing and ambush and stuff like that, mainly geared for officers who were not going to be branched infantry. So people like me going artillery, armor, cavalry, anything else they're going to do. So we went through that. And then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which is the home of the field artillery, for my artillery training, which was about 12 months, give or take, at Fort Sill, which was an extraordinary experience. Never been to Oklahoma. I've never seen weather as crazy as what I saw in Oklahoma. The heat, the cold, the wind, it's just whatever you can think of, they have it there. Coming from a place that's mostly, tepid year-round, it was certainly different for me. But that was a great experience. Really enjoyed it. And then completing that, I was sent back to Georgia to Fort Stewart, which I think may have also been renamed. I don't know what it's called now, outside of Savannah, Georgia. And that's where my unit was, the 3rd Infantry Division. That's where I spent the duration of my Army career, minus my deployments overseas. But other than that, I was at Fort Stewart for my entire service career, and then Fort Benning and Fort Sill for my training.
Yeah. So to kind of expand on each of these phases, anything stand out in particular from any of them that, just come to mind that you want to share?
I mean, it was just the overall experience, right? I mean, this was new to just about all of us, with the exception of the prior service guys. So it was just, we were getting indoctrinated into the military, right? We were also meeting a whole bunch of new people. And one of the biggest takeaways that I got just from my military service overall was the breadth and the diversity of the people that I met. Growing up where and how I did, I had a very specific demographic that I sort of knew and was familiar with, and I didn't have a lot of experience in other things. But the Army is the greatest melting pot in the world, or the military, I should say, is the greatest melting pot in the world, right? I mean, when I was serving, I served with, I knew, and I had friends from all 50 states, every territory in the United States, every race, every religion, every socioeconomic background. I mean, whatever you can think of, we had it, right? And so everybody was, and there were people who'd probably never seen a guy from my background that, and we became best friends. And that is one of the biggest things that stuck with me just from that experience. And I think a lot of other people too, is becoming so close, becoming such good friends, brothers, even with people that had you not done this experience, you probably never would have spoken to in your life. And so that was happening on top of, being introduced to the military for the first time, and then having to learn all the skills that we needed to learn, and knowing that more than likely 100% of us were probably going to be deployed within a year of completing our training. So we had all of that going on in our minds. And then on top of that, just trying to take it in and absorb it. Because sometimes you don't realize how cool the thing that you're doing is until it's over and it's gone. And you realize, wow, that was actually extraordinary experience, and just trying to take it in and soak it up was while also retaining it was challenging at times, because you wanted to have fun but you want to learn, but it was just, there was so much happening, there was so much information, it was going nonstop, starting at 5 a.m, going until 10, 11 o'clock at night, and just being a part of that, and then also feeling like you're part of something else. You're a part of something bigger. You're in the fight, so to speak, now. And just being able to do that was just, from a kid who didn't have a lot of exposure to things like that growing up, it was just, it was fascinating. It was fun. It was exciting. It was intimidating. It was the whole gamut and range of emotions that you can think of. And it was also your job. At the end of the day, you sometimes have to pinch yourself and be like, I'm getting paid to be doing this right now. Like, I'm at a shooting range. I used to pay to do that, and now they're paying me to do it, and so it's a totally different dynamic. And it was a hell of a time, man. I mean, it was really just an extraordinary experience and learning a lot. And being artillery specific, a lot of what we do is very math and science, right? It's a lot of physics, it's a lot of ballistics. We're dealing with air temperatures, air densities, propellant temperatures, earth rotation, factoring in gravity. When you're doing long distance, high angle artillery shooting, there are so many factors contributing to where that round is going to land once you fire it, that I'd never used a slide ruler in my life, and here we are with a dozen of them on the table trying to figure out these firing solutions. And it was just, it's like, how the hell did I end up here doing this? It's just sort of incredible, right? But it was just awesome, man. It was really an incredible experience.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I want to go back to one of the things you highlighted in terms of military being a melting pot. I think that gets lost on a lot of people. Just I guess, not recognizing how diverse the system is and how much exposure you get to different people. And that's also one of the things that, we hear a lot from our veterans in terms of those translatable skills is just, ability to, cooperate, to communicate, to collaborate with people from all over the world, all over the country, whatever it is. So I really like that you highlighted that aspect of your service and experience. That's awesome.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is something I feel like people should be aware of. There's a lot
Mhm.
of division in society kind of right now, and people are sometimes getting pitted against each other for this, that, or the other thing. But when you look at the military as a subset of the population, you see that that really
Mhm.
isn't the case. If it can work there, it can work everywhere, right? If we can all get along in a small army unit, then why can't everybody else, right? And I think people just need to
Totally.
realize that when you're forced to be together, when you're forced to work together, live together, sleep together, eat together, do all of it, when your life depends on the dude next to you, whether you like him or not, you all find ways to make it work because you have to. And I think that's the most important lesson that probably maybe gets lost.
Yeah.
It's not just the army is not just good old boys from the South, right? There's a whole group of people in it, and it's a small subset of the population. Only
Mhm.
1%, I think, of Americans serve or have served in the military. So it's a small group, but if you just take that percent and extrapolate it, I don't see any reason why we can't have that kind of harmony on a greater level. You just have to find the reasons to make it work and the motivations to make it work.
Yeah, well said, man. I absolutely agree. So I want to expand on what you kind of touched on before I took a step back, which was kind of the technical um, use case of artillery, or the technical kind of learnings of it and how you deploy. I'm curious kind of how training went in that regard, and if you could shed some more light into kind of the math that's used in that training.
Absolutely. Artillery is very interesting because it has several different subsects within the branch, so to speak, and they're very different. Part of it is an art, part of it is a science, and it just depends on also what role you're doing. And when you're enlisted,
Mhm.
you have a very specific function, but when you're an officer, you have to understand it all, right? So the art part of it would be doing like fire support. So if you're attached to an infantry unit and they need to call in artillery support, you're the guy on the radio saying, "Hey, I need you to fire. I need the rounds to land right here," right? Well, then there's the guys that need to fire the gun. They don't understand what that means. They don't know where you are. They don't know where I need the rounds to be right here are. Even if you tell them I need it to be 300 meters in front of me, they don't know that because they don't know where you are. So how do you make that
Mhm.
work? So you have to have a fire direction center, which is basically, so the fire support is the eyes, the fire direction is the brain, and then you have the guns, which are basically doing all the work. So when you're doing fire direction, you have to take, okay, well, I know the gun is positioned here. I know the guy calling for help is here, and I know he needs his rounds to land here. So how do we make that work? It's just a simple math problem, right? I mean, you know where you are, you know where you want the round to go. You have to calculate your variables. Again, wind speed, wind direction, the air temperature, the air density, what propellant temperature you have going on, if it's a high enough shot, earth rotation, and there's a whole other host of factors. And each one of those things is an addition to your firing solution. So if the temperature is 50 degrees, you might add 0.000013. If it's 51 degrees, you add 0.000132. Whatever it is to your solution when you compute it in the computer. And we have a book that's the size of a dictionary. I mean, it's probably that thick and with tiny print, and it's just what those solutions are for every conceivable temperature, wind speed, direction scenario, whatever they could think of, it's there. Obviously, there are computers now that do a lot of this automatically, but you still have to know how to do it in case the technology fails. So again, it's a lot of,
Mhm.
we call it charts and darts, big maps, protractors, needles with, pins and string and putting them on there and marking things and doing all this crazy math, the slide rulers, plugging in all the equations. You have to factor all of that in because the guys calling for the fire support are speaking one language. The guys firing the guns are speaking an entirely different language because all they do to set a cannon is deflection and quadrant, right? Deflection lifts the gun tube up and down. Quadrant takes you left and right. The guy calling for fire doesn't know what either of those two things mean. That's a foreign term for him. So you have to translate, I need rounds 300 feet to the north, into what is the deflection and quadrant for the firing solution. And that's what the fire direction does. And so that's a big part of it. That's the science part. The art
Mhm.
part is trying to determine, okay, well, I'm standing on the side of a mountain and I see a tank coming at me. I think it's a mile, but maybe it's a half mile. I think he's going 20 miles an hour, but he could be going 15. You kind of got to figure it out and try to guess where you need the round to go. And then, again, it's also math, right? If you're trying to take out a moving vehicle, if you know the direction it's going, the speed it's going, and presuming it maintains its heading and speed, again, it's just a simple math problem. Growing up, I always liked math and science, so I think that sort of maybe steered me into artillery. I knew I wanted to be a combat arms branch person, so that would be either infantry, armor, or artillery in the United States Army. And then the math aspect and the science aspect kind of really drew me to that, because it's kind of interesting. It's combat, it's fighting, it's hua hua type stuff, but it's also like you got to whip out your brain every once in a while and figure out how are we going to do this, because people's lives depend on it. When they say I need a round of high explosive here and now, they need it to be there now. You can't miss, you can't be late. Time on target. On time every time. That's just kind of the way we did things. And it's just fun, man. It's fun, it's interesting, but it's a lot to learn, right? Because you have to learn all the firing tables. You have to learn how to do, how many kids today use protractors and slide rulers? Probably not that many. You got to figure out how to do this. You got to be able to read a map. You got to be able to use a protractor. You got to be able to use your little things to calculate, grid squares to the, you can't just use a standard grid square at, a click, or even narrow it down to 500 meters. You have to get down to within 10 meters or even within 1 meter looking at a map. So you have to, the precision and the exactness is extraordinary. And the Army does it really, really well. And just being able to learn from the guys who had done that, learn how to, handle those systems, and then also getting to fire the guns. Because again, when you're enlisted, you either are the guy shooting the cannon, or you are the guy in the fire direction center, or you are the guy with the infantry unit calling in the rounds. You don't do all of those things. As an officer, you have to know how to do all of those things. So we spent time doing fire support, doing fire direction, spend time on the gun, because you don't know what your job is going to be. You can be a platoon leader overseeing a platoon of 4 howitzers. You could be a fire support officer attached to an infantry or an armor unit, or you could be running a fire direction center. In my case, I did 2 of the 3. Most officers do 2 of the 3. Right? I served as a fire support officer with an infantry unit for the bulk of my career, and then ended up as a platoon leader for about a year, overseeing a platoon of 4 howitzers and a fire direction center. So I had to, you got to know it all, because you never know what you're going to be doing. So there was a lot to learn, right? There was definitely a lot to learn, a lot to absorb. And the Army is great at teaching, but they also just expect you to get it. They expect you to get it the first time, and they expect you to retain it and move on. So you just got to be kind of on your game constantly, because they're throwing so much information at you. It's like taking 4 years of college in the span of a year. I mean, the amount of books we had, the amount of things we had, learning these calculators, computers. I mean, forget a standard scientific calculator. The things we had to do is just crazy. The systems we had to use and understand and be able to handle. That's on top of doing other officer duties or any other Army duties, because anybody who's served in the military knows you may be assigned one job, you may be trained as one job, but at the end of the day, you're going to do whatever they need you to do, whether it was what you learned or not. And so you got to be ready for anything. You're still running a platoon. You still have to deal with personnel problems. You still have to deal with people's emotions. You're going to get tasked out with additional duties. On top of that, I had to be the supply officer. I was the arms room officer. I was this, that, and the other thing. Had 17 jobs going on. You have to run a rifle range because you got to qualify everybody. You've got to be there to supervise a convoy going out to a training site. All these things taking you away from your normal day job, so to speak, and doing all these additional duties. And that just gets magnified when you're deployed. Because again, I was trained as an artillery officer. I was branched as an artillery officer. That's what I did in my unit. But when I got there, when we deployed, I ended up doing intelligence almost the entire deployment, right? Which I had not been trained in at all. So it's kind of learning that on the fly as well. It makes it fun, man. It makes it exciting. No 2 days are the same. You never know what you're going to see the next day. And I think that's part of the joy of it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, kind of what you just alluded to in the end there, where in deployment you had a necessity to operate in different functions. I kind of relate for other listeners who are not veterans. It's good for them to kind of create this relatability where you can go study to be a lawyer, then you go into practice and you're practicing not what you studied, right? I mean, probably all of the time. So it's kind of like those principles, right, in terms of how they'll ingrain you into ingrain those principles into you as it relates to operating in your field, right, in your arena.
Absolutely.
So when you when you get to deployment, you're going to be able to adapt.
It's like they always say, it's the needs of the Army, right? Oh, you want to do this, you want to do this, and we want you to do that. But at the end of the day, it's the needs of the Army. And if we need you to do this, well, yes, you joined the Army to be an infantryman, but we need you to do laundry. So you're going to do it now. I mean, it's just, you never know, right? So
exactly.
But it makes it interesting.
So in training, where was the break between, I guess, unless it was just simply basic training, and then you from basic training shifted to
training
officer
to
school?
Officer school. I mean, I think I had a day in between. I mean, they were both. Yeah. They were next to each other, right? So graduated from basic training, did the whole ceremony. My wife and in-laws came, and then I think I was able to spend one night, kind of at the hotel with my family and go to dinner and do all that. And then the next morning was reporting to OCS down the street. So packed up all my stuff, walked over there, checked in, was there for however long it was, 6 or 7 months, and then finished there. I think I got maybe a week or two to get myself to Fort Sill, and then drove from Georgia to Oklahoma with all my stuff in my truck and showed up there, and class started. I got there on Sunday, and we started in earnest on Monday, and that went until I finished, and I had my unit assignment, and then I think I had a week to get back to Georgia and show up to my unit. So things happen very quickly. I mean, you finish, you go to the next phase. You finish, you go to the next phase. You finish, you go to the next phase. In time, you accrue, leave and PTO hours, and you can take some time accordingly. But no, they try to keep schedules as tight as possible. Now, if things fall in holiday periods and whatnot, there is some breaks in it, but it was pretty much straightforward. I mean, I showed up to Fort Benning for basic July of 2008, and then I got to my unit at the end of 2009, and it was pretty much nonstop in between that whole period. So, and then once I got to the unit, it was pretty much nonstop as well. Because they were gearing up for deployment. I mean, we knew when I got there, we were within a year going to be deploying, and there's a whole, host of things that have to happen before a unit is qualified to deploy. You've got to do, training at the brigade level, at the battalion level, at the company level, at the platoon level, at the squad level, and the team level to get yourself qualified. It actually goes in the reverse order. You start at the smallest with the team level and go on through that. And once you finish your brigade exercise, then you're technically, I guess, qualified to deploy is for lack of a better word. And so we had that going on, and that was a very long process, which culminated in a month-long rotation at the National Training Center, doing the whole war game and that whole thing. And that was about a month or two before we actually shipped out. So it was pretty much, it was high intensity. And it was also an interesting time for me personally. I met my wife in college. We both went to school together. She's 2 years younger than I am. So when I graduated, she was going to be starting her junior year. She had 2 years left, basically. So I left, and was pretty much in training for a year and a half. I think we saw each other maybe at Christmas or Thanksgiving. It was kind of tight. Got to my unit. She was finishing school. So by the time she did her last 2 years, she came out to my unit, and that was about a month before I was deploying. And we got married. So the first 2 years of our relationship, we started dating about 6 months before I left for the Army. So we had 6 months together. I left for the Army. We saw each other maybe once or twice during the first 2 years. Then she came out. We got married. I deployed a week later, and she set up a house in Georgia for us while I was gone. So everything just happened really fast for me. There was a lot going on, but it made us both grow up. I mean, I was 23. She was just turning 22, 21. We were young, had no idea what we were doing, but all of a sudden we're on the other side of the country from both of our families, having to build a house for the first time and do all this stuff. And, it was her first time living alone. I'd lived in apartments by myself in college, but it was a first for her. And, it was just a lot going on in life, and the Army is the military is good at that. It doesn't really, it cares very much about the people who are in it and what's going on in their lives, but they also don't, right? Because at the end of the day, you've got to do what you've got to do when you've got to do it. And whatever's happening in your personal life, that's all fine and well. And if they can help you out with it, they will. But at the end of the day, you have a duty and you're expected to fulfill it no matter what. So
End of the day, military is the priority,
always.
not you or your
Nope.
personal life. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot happening in, relatively short period of time. Looking back at that whole process, any advice you'd give, other, vets who have just enlisted or just people considering military, generally speaking?
Anybody who's in the military, I will definitely say, if you're not planning on making it a career and you are planning an exit, and this is not something I regret. Regret's not the right word, but make sure you do everything you want to do before you leave, right? I did my 6 years of active duty. I knew from the get-go I was going to be like a 3 to 5 year kind of guy, right? Just do it for a little bit, get out before I get kind of too committed, right? You get to a certain point where you've been in 10 plus years, you might as well do 20 and retire. You kind of just get into it and it's almost too hard to get out, right? And I didn't want that. Because I had a 3 to 5 year time frame. I had friends who were starting some businesses in real estate and whatnot, and I knew I wanted to go that route. So I don't regret doing what I did, but there are some things that I didn't quite get to accomplish in my career. And so what I would say is, if you are in and you are on that mindset where you're not going to do it for a career, you just want to get the experience, you get some money for college or whatever it is, which is all fine and well. Everybody serves for their own reasons, and I don't judge anybody's reason for serving. But just make sure, if there's something you want to do, whatever it is, you want to go somewhere overseas, you want to get, jump train and go to airborne school, or you want to do whatever it is, make sure you do it before you get out. Because if you get out before you got to do whatever that thing was, you will kind of be like, oh man, I kind of wish I'd done that. So definitely, if you're in, consider that. If you're considering the military, I absolutely encourage anybody to do it. I think it's absolutely worthwhile. I think it's absolutely beneficial. I think people should serve their country. Part of me, I definitely don't support, drafts or mandatory service or anything like that. I think it's a really bad idea from the military standpoint. I do not want to be getting shot at in a foxhole with somebody that doesn't want to be there. That's the worst situation you can be in, right? But I do think people should, serve somehow, give back to the country in some way, or not just this country, whatever country you come from, you should want to do something for it. I think the military is a great way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but I think the military is a great way to do it. So if you are looking to that, I support you. And it doesn't seem readily apparent initially, but a lot of the skills and what you gain from being in the military will really help you in the civilian sector. And sometimes, again, it's not readily apparent. It's not always easily identifiable, but the skills are there, and it will certainly set you apart. And companies want to hire veterans. The company that I work at would like to hire more veterans, and that there's separate issues involved with that, which is how do you find veterans exiting the military, joining the private sector. Yes, there are recruiters and things like that, but that process could probably be streamlined somehow. I don't know how, or if that's just a conceptual notion, but I think it could be. But no, set a few, even 2-3 years in a branch of the military will set you up for a hugely successful civilian career, especially if you're the 17 or 18-year-old who doesn't have a lot of life experience, who just got out of high school. It will grow you up. It will mature you. You will learn really beneficial skills that just help you not only in business or whatever your career is, but just in life, and understanding how to get through life. Life isn't easy, right? It's hard for everybody. There's always struggle. There's always, obstacles you've got to get through, and there's hardship. And anybody who hasn't experienced hardship, you just need to live a little bit longer, and you will, right? So this prepares you for that, and better, I would say, than almost anything else does. So
yeah, well said, man. I totally agree with what you just said and that sentiment in general. And we're going to, of course, get into those translatable skills and identifying, military skill sets into civilian profession and career. But before we get there, where we took a step back from was you finished the training cycle when you got to your unit, preparing for deployment. So let's continue, in your life story there, getting ready for deployment. What's that like? Where are you deploying to?
Yeah, so we were selected to deploy to Iraq mid 2009 for a 12-month deployment, which ended in mid 2010. Our unit was scattered throughout kind of Iraq, and the war was somewhat winding down, right? We didn't have 190,000 people there or whatever it was in its heyday. I think we had maybe 15 or 20,000 people. So it was a much smaller U.S. presence. We were kind of just the last lingering group of people. We were in three primary areas, Ramadi, Fallujah, and a little bit in Baghdad. My primary location was Fallujah, which anybody who understands the history of the Iraq War knows, Fallujah was kind of a flashpoint during the war. There were a couple major battles there, a lot of, substantial losses. It was a very high conflict area. It was the capital of the Anbar Triangle, where you had all of the Al-Qaeda and all the insurgency basically was bred and headquartered there, right? So we were kind of right in the thick of it. This period was kind of when Al-Qaeda in Iraq was phasing away, and ISIS, or the Islamic State, was kind of starting to form up and fill that void, right? And so that's kind of what we were dealing with, while also facilitating basically the shutdown of the deployment, right? So we were the last unit to occupy our base. We handed that over to the Iraqis when we left. Our deployment we were on an Iraqi installation. We were partnered with an Iraqi unit. It was me and my guys, which was 4 or 5 soldiers that I had with me. And we were in the headquarters of an Iraqi division. So it was the 5 or 6 of us, and there were 190 Iraqi soldiers in the building. And we were just there to help them, advise them, and run, our business as we needed to. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it was a lot of intelligence work. As an artilleryman, we weren't really shooting a lot in Iraq then, or really ever. Artillery is not really suited for urban environments unless it's very specific situations. So where we weren't just shooting up the cities, we were not doing any of that. So they needed something else for us to do, and that led us to doing intelligence and counterintelligence. So we were looking at weapons smuggling from Syria, and smuggling routes within Iraq, and where were certain key insurgents going on and moving, and who were they talking to, and we were trying to what could we intercept, either communication wise or things like that, and putting the pieces of the puzzle together, right? So we had flow diagrams, and this guy knows this guy, and this guy knows this guy, so these guys probably know each other, so let's investigate that a little bit more and see what we can find, and kind of doing the detective work, right? We would do patrols. We would go into the city fairly frequently. We would go to, key leader engagements. We would meet with the mayor of Fallujah, the police chiefs, city councilmen. We did missions with State Department people. They were going to look at, they just rebuilt the Fallujah power plant, the water treatment plant. So we were going to look at stuff like that, doing a lot of civil affairs type work. We did lots of school supply drops, taking books and school supplies to the local schools. So it wasn't just always combat. It was mostly the main job, right? But every once in a while, we'd load up all of our trucks with a bunch of stuff for the kids and go and show up at a school and give it out. And that was always nice to see, because the kids were always super receptive. They were kind of excited to see us. They wanted to shake our hands, or just be near us, or even just stare at us. And that was contrast to driving through the streets of Fallujah and seeing kind of the men sort of stare you down or give you less than polite gestures as you're driving by, because they don't like you. They don't want you to be there. And many of them would probably kill you if given the opportunity, right? And so you're just, having to deal with these guys. And that was also true with some of the people we would meet with. We were having meetings, sitting face to face with people who I knew for a fact, if he was given the opportunity, would take my life like that, right? But we're still acting like, okay, man, what can I do for you? How can I help you? How are you going to help me? Let's try to find a way to work together. But we have that relationship where we knew any other situation we would be trying to kill each other, right? So it was extraordinary in that sense, right? But it was 12 months of that, of just trying to still maintain the fight, draw down our presence there, and do what we can to leave sort of a lasting positive impression of American service members for the youth in Iraq, right? How successful we all were in that is certainly left for others to determine, I guess, in the years and decades to come. But, we definitely tried to do our best. It wasn't just, bombs and bullets. It's also winning the hearts and minds. And, you gotta take all of that into consideration. But it was busy. I mean, it was, we worked, some units didn't have this. Some units got Sundays off where they kind of had some downtime. We were 7 days a week for the duration. We didn't get Sundays off. There was no weekend. There was no, hey man, you're gonna go take a day off. It's every day was the same. I mean, it was almost pointless to keep a calendar because it didn't matter if it was Monday, Tuesday, or Friday. It was the same day. Nothing changed, right? So 12 months of that was interesting, right? I mean, it kind of, you just got to find ways to sometimes fight through the brief. I mean, again, every day is different, but it can also be monotonous at times because you're just sort of doing the same things, but they're different. And you have to find ways to fight through that. You miss your family, you realize you don't realize what you miss until you don't have it, right? And one of the things that stuck with me that I wanted to just do when I got home from my deployment was I wanted to lie on a couch. Lying down on a couch is really probably something that almost anybody would take completely for granted. But just being able to do that was something that I longed for in ways that I can't even describe. And so it really changes your mind when you don't have any of the creature comforts, any of the things that you're used to. You haven't seen your family in 8 months, and it's hard. You got to find those ways to push through. But being in a dangerous environment, the only thing separating our little compound from the masses in Fallujah was a tiny little barbed wire fence that probably wouldn't have even stopped a cow. So that was it. There was nothing else between us and them. So you had to be on your guard all the time, ready for anything. And it just, it was exciting. We all got sick several times because, it was water got contaminated or this happened or some other, incident. And, you're fighting through, half the company is vomiting and you're still trying to maintain your mission and you're trying to do what you got to do. And, you never know really what you're going to deal with, random people showing up at the gate, trying to come on, saying, hey, I just found a bomb over here. Do you want to come and take a look at it? And trying to deal with, okay, is this guy serious? Is he going to try to, kill us as soon as we let him in? What's going to happen? You never know. And it's just, it keeps you on your toes, man. I mean, I certainly picked up a few gray hairs when I was over there, definitely aged a little bit while I was over there. But, I learned a lot and I got some great experiences. I was selected partly because of the job I was doing, because I was almost entirely outsourced to basically the Iraqi units and was dealing with Iraqi soldiers almost 99% of my time. Very rarely would I see other Americans outside my unit. I got to go to Baghdad to do an Arabic language and culture class where they just sort of immersed us with some of the local Iraqis who were working there, and we ate with them. We spoke with them. We spent the whole day with them. They taught us how to read Arabic, how to write Arabic. No, I don't remember most of it. If anybody's going to ask me that later, but we learned how to read, we learned how to write, we learned how to speak. We'd go and we'd have chai, tea, and hookah with them at the end of the day, and just sort of get to experience their culture. And I did that for about 2 weeks in Baghdad, and it was just I would never have experienced that had it not been for the Army. So I'm just immensely grateful for those types of experiences. It just made it super interesting, super exciting, getting to see, things of historical significance. I mean, obviously the Middle East has extraordinary history going back thousands of years. Even just seeing the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm here kind of like seeing some of this stuff, that's thousands of years old. And then also just, history from the war, and things that had happened, both good and bad, but seeing, where those things happened, was interesting. So
Totally. Before you deployed, did you know what your mission set was going to be, or it was when you got there?
So we knew a couple months beforehand. So when we did our National Training Center rotation at Fort Irwin, which was amazing, because if you didn't know and you had just woke up there, you would have thought you were in Iraq. I mean, they did such a good job of Now, I didn't know it at the time because I'd never been to Iraq when I was there.
Right.
But as soon as I got there, I was just like, oh my God, this is exactly what they had set up there. The buildings looked the same. It smelled the same. The sounds were the same. I mean, the way that people interacted with the role players, because they were all Iraqi nationals, they got into it. They played the parts. It was exact. The police chief, the guy who played the police chief in our training center, was almost the mirror image of the actual police chief we had in Iraq. I mean, it was the same thing. And it was like, wow, I'm prepared for this because we spent a month basically living in Iraq before we went there. So yes, I knew what I was going to do. I knew it was going to be that. I knew I was going to be doing the intelligence stuff, right? I knew I was going to be transitioning away from the artillery and doing more intel work, and I knew I was going to be doing the advise and assist and partnering with the Iraqi unit. So my rotation was spent basically in a little hut with my guys and a bunch of the Iraqi role players, and that turns out to be basically exactly what happened when I went. So
that's cool.
It's sometimes when you're there in the moment. And anyone who serves in the military knows this. There are times where you're standing around and you're just like, what the hell are we doing? Like, what is this about? What is the point? What is the value? Like, why are we here? Why are we standing in this field for 5 hours? Like, I just don't understand. But when you get to where you need to be, you see that it all made sense and it was all just designed to get you where you need to be mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever it is. And they prepare you. The Army prepares you. I was prepared for everything we dealt with when we were there. So
yeah, I love what you just said, where you'll constantly go through those cycles of physical, emotional, spiritual, of like why and what.
Yeah.
So that was a good way of putting it.
It doesn't always make sense
relatable.
immediately. You can't always tell the point when you're doing it, but eventually, if you give it time and have a little faith, it will show you that actually maybe there was some logic to it. So
yeah. So finishing up this deployment, how does that end, and what happens next?
So we wound it down after 12 months. Signed over a lot of our equipment, the facilities, our entire compound. We basically signed over to the Iraqi army. They took it over. We packed up our trucks with our personal effects, basically, and literally handed them the key and drove away. And that was how that literally ended. We were the last unit there. So,
oh wow, yeah,
it wasn't quite like the Afghanistan drawdown that we had a couple years ago, where a lot of sensitive equipment was left. We took our trucks, we took our aircraft, we took things like that with us, but we left the buildings and basic equipment behind, and the Iraqis were grateful for that. And we had to do inventories, obviously, which takes weeks. Anyone who's done an inventory in the military knows that it's just, when you've got to do that or a sensitive item check, you're going to be there for however many days it takes to go through every serial number and verify every single thing that you have. And that's what we had to do. So
cool. Yeah. So then, so you finish that up, you hand over the keys, you get back home. What happens from there? Nick, you with me?
Yeah. Just had a brief
we had
connection loss.
There's a brief delay. So where we left off was you finishing deployment.
Yeah, so we
getting back home.
We signed over all of our equipment, did all of our inventories. The last probably week was spent kind of lying down with our feet up, sort of just waiting for the plane, basically, to take us back, and kind of doing a lot of reflection and whatnot. And then came home, got on a flight, went through Kuwait and Germany and whatever we did to get home. And then we had a welcome home ceremony, right? All the buses pulled in, and we got, everybody's families was there, and they had music playing, and they did the whole thing to kind of welcome us home. And then they gave us, I don't know, a week or two maybe of just downtime, sort of, to go be with family, just kind of decompress. And then it was back at it, right? After 2 weeks after getting back, it was kind of like, okay, we're back, we're settled. Some people leave, right? Some people are going to their next unit. Their time is over. We're getting replacement people coming in. Some of us are staying there. And so there was a lot of transition happening, new faces, people coming and going, and then starting the reset. I stayed with my company after the deployment for, I don't know, about 3 months, maybe. Just sort of rebuilding, restocking, kind of doing that, coming up with how do we retrain. And basically everything is cyclical, right? And
Mhm.
that unit and my brigade was preparing for an upcoming deployment to Afghanistan. So it was sort of like, okay, we're back. We're going to be doing this again. This next year is going to be doing, the team level, squad level, platoon level, going all the way through the training, and then deploying to
Mhm.
Afghanistan. So it's like, okay, now we've got to learn a new place, a new culture, but still kind of the same situation. And we started preparing for that. So I was with my company for about 3 months doing that. And then I was moved up to battalion to take on a staff position doing operations and plans, which was different. I didn't, at the time, I didn't want to leave being in a line unit and go to a staff function. I kind of wanted to stay sort of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, or what I
Mhm.
thought where the rubber meets the road, being in the actual frontline units. I was like, oh, I don't want to be a staff officer. That sounds terrible. I'm going to be sitting in a cubicle with a computer. Like, this is not what I wanted. I didn't join the army to be in a cubicle with a laptop, right?
Right.
And sure enough, that's exactly where I ended up, in a cubicle with a laptop, doing operations and plans. But it was interesting because I was essentially planning a 9-month deployment to Afghanistan for my battalion, with our
Yeah.
senior plans officer. And that was a whole new experience. Planning the training events, planning, the training, the staffing, how many people are we going to need to deploy? How many people do we need to stay back? Which particular units do we want to go? Which particular, skill sets, MOSs do we want to have with us to go? How do we train these people? So I was coordinating all of that, making sure they're qualified, making sure they're, everybody's done their physical and medical checks. They're qualified on their weapons. They're qualified in, their survival skills, whatever they need to do to be eligible to deploy, making sure we got the whole battalion qualified. And did that and got everybody set up to deploy. And then I was moved up to doing basically the same function at the brigade level instead of the battalion level, and was helping with prepare sort of the whole brigade to go. And then about half the brigade ended up deploying and the other half stayed back. And that was just also due to troop drawdowns that were
Mhm.
being undertaken then. So we couldn't take everybody. We were trying to reduce our numbers. So we sent about half, and about half stayed back. I stayed back and was the sort of the main operations and plans officer for the rear detachment group. And my function there was basically just monitoring everything that was going on and working on any, replacement issues that we had. So if we're getting new
Mhm.
soldiers, training them up, getting them ready to send them over for replacements, receiving anybody that was coming home either due to, end of service or injury or anything like that, and just sort of making sure everything was running smoothly. We were the eyes and the ears back home, basically, for our guys deployed. And I did that for a few months. At this point, I knew my career was winding down. I had sort of an end date, right, which was, I think, October of that year. So there was an end point, and it was just getting closer and
Mhm.
closer and closer, right? And I knew it was coming. So, I started kind of getting tasked with less things as we got to that point, right? Because you don't want a guy that's going to be leaving, responsible for everything. And so the last month or so, I kind of was afforded the opportunity to sort of hang out, for a lack of a better word, and kind of, just sort of soak up the last of my army days. And I should mention, I had just had surgery also prior to that. I had an issue with my hip that was just exacerbated by jumping in and out of trucks and helicopters with 200 pounds of gear on. So I had to have a hip surgery. I actually need to have another one at some point. I'm not looking forward to that, but I had that, so I was recovering from that as well. I was on crutches for a few days, and I just sort of had an easy sort of transition after that. And then, my wife and I, we packed up our household goods, sent it out to California, packed up the car, sent them out to California. And then my last day, sort of, waved goodbye to the base and drove away. And again, when I say to people exiting the military, make sure you do everything you want to do before you leave, really make sure you do everything you want to do. One thing I regret is I didn't even get a damn picture in front of like my old unit before I left. I should have probably done something like that. But at the time, I was so just sort of past the army at that point and was looking to the
Mhm.
next step, and was looking to, basically being in California wearing, shorts and a t-shirt and getting into real estate. And I was like, that's where I'm thinking. I'm not, this is the
Yeah.
past, this is not the future. And so I just sort of left, right? Kind of, disappeared in the middle of the night. And that probably wasn't the right way to do it. In hindsight, I wish I'd just, walked around and even sat down in the motor pool for an hour and just sort of just sat there, and just take it in.
Yeah.
So when you're getting out, anybody listening, when you're getting out, say goodbye to everybody and everything that you want to say goodbye to, because you may not get another chance to do it. So
yeah, that's great advice, man. I mean, obviously hindsight is way easier to, to give that knowledge than in the moment.
And that took years.
Especially
that
in that
took years. I mean, even my first couple years out, I wasn't really thinking about it. But then I got older and I was like, shit, like I should have done that. Or, I have friends who are still in and they'll be posting stuff on Facebook, and I'm like, oh, I remember that place. We did tons of it, training exercises there. And I'm like, I don't have any pictures of it. And it's kind of like, well, damn, like, also, to make myself feel better, camera phones were not quite as prevalent then, because I'm always kind of like, I don't have as many pictures as like people serving now do. And I'm like, why is that? And then I'm like, oh, well, I didn't even get my first iPhone, I don't think, until after my deployment. So I was like, okay, well, this is why I don't have any pictures, but I regret that.
Huge difference, yeah.
But that's no, just
huge
a factor
difference,
of time, right? There's nothing you can do about that except be born later. So
yeah, correct, exactly. So that, before we continue, that hip surgery or injury, was that happening because of things you were doing in deployment or from training or both?
It really was a genetic thing, right? But normally this wouldn't have impacted me noticeably until my 60s, probably. Mm-hmm. It just got exacerbated by my Army career, by the physical activity, the jumping, the weight, moving around with tons of gear, jumping up and down with tons of gear. That just made it hit me at 25 instead of hitting me at 65.
Yeah.
And it basically just caused immense pain in my feet, my legs. I mean, it just radiates from your hip down your legs. I couldn't really march. I couldn't run. I could barely walk. There were times where I couldn't stand. And so they were like, yeah, we've got to get in there. We've got to remove some bone. There's too much bone and all this. So they had to cut part of my, hip bone away and do all that. Yeah. So.
Damn, that's tough. Yeah.
It was about a 6-hour surgery and then a couple days recovery.
I hope you continue recovering from that, man.
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I feel great now, but they only did one side at the time. I'm going to have to get the other side done eventually. And they always tell me, the younger you are when you do that, probably the better it's going to be. But I'm putting it off as long as I possibly can. So,
I mean, it's not easy either way. So I don't
want to do it. Life is busy. I don't want to go through that. But as long as I can still function, I'm an old soldier. I'm a little tough. I will try to just keep going. Right. I'm the kind of guy that won't really take aspirin unless I'm about to die. So I'm just going to fight through it, and we'll see what happens. And when I get to a point where I can't walk, we'll see what happens. Hopefully medical technology has advanced a ton by then, and maybe it'll just be an easy outpatient procedure by then. We'll see. I'm hopeful.
Yeah. I'm with you, man. Yeah. I'll keep the hopes with you as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So you finish service, you get back to California. What's that period and process like for you?
So came back, and again, knew I was going to be in real estate. Had some friends who were in real estate. So the first thing I did was basically interning with a good friend at a commercial real estate office, learning. I didn't know a lot about real estate. I knew I wanted to be involved with it. I liked it. I appreciated it at multiple different levels. I appreciate the design in real estate. I like architecture. I appreciate the investment value in real estate, and I appreciate the utility of it. We all have to live somewhere. Every business needs to have an office. It can be something to look at. It's something that we all need to use, and it's something that you can profit from. So it kind of checked a bunch of blocks for me. And so I was just like, okay, this is something I can get into. I had some connections in the field. So I did. So I started at a commercial real estate office interning, working on getting my real estate license, got my real estate license, did my first few years in sales, just as a realtor, which was different, was exciting, was challenging, was something that I enjoyed but didn't, right? I'm glad that I did it, and I learned a lot, and I succeeded at it, but it just really wasn't my thing. I'm not really a salesman. I also that's not something I enjoy doing. I don't like talking to people for the sake of just talking to people. That's also not something I enjoy doing, right? So that just was going to be a hindrance in that career, and I knew that from the get-go. It was more of a means to an end. And that's exactly what happened, because in time after doing that for a few years, I actually ended up as the sales, training, and acquisitions manager at a new startup real estate company, helping them build out their platform, build out their system, hire and train agents, overseeing the agents, and kind of having more of a management and leadership role, which obviously, based on my military experience, was something that I was much more suited for.
Mm-hmm.
And so got to do that. And that was very exciting. And while I was working there, I took advantage of the GI Bill to go back to school, to graduate school, to get my MBA. So I was working, full time, and also going to school part time. And I did that for about 18 or 19 months, however long the program was. And it was great. And I learned a lot in that program that helped me at my career. But I also realized I wanted to do more than just run a real estate office, not run a real estate office, but sort of manage a bunch of agents.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a brother or a friend who was my best man, who was one of the kids I mentioned who I grew up with, who ended up serving in the military as well. We kind of had a very similar life path, if you will, except he
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately went into the Navy, and I let him know my thoughts on that, obviously. But we were able to get past that emotional event and reconcile. But he worked for Toll Brothers, which was one of the largest and best home builders here in America, and got me kind of a reference sort of in. And he worked in the Bay Area, but they were looking for a project manager down here in Southern California. So he, kind of slipped my name into the system, and I applied and interviewed and was hired. And that got me into my home building and construction career, and started as, project manager at a home community. It was about 190 homes that we were building, and I was overseeing, the construction, the sales, the whole when you're the project manager, you're responsible for the whole entire community. And that was really my first experience with building, with construction. I mean, getting involved with it. I mean, you're not hammering nails when you're a project manager, but you're managing the subs, you're dealing with all the contracts, you're dealing with all the issues, so you're in it. And you're also dealing with the sales side, you're dealing with unhappy customers, you're dealing with everything involved with it. And I had a team of a couple, construction superintendents, I had a junior project manager, I had a sales team. And it was great, and we had a good time. We sold a lot of houses. We built a lot of houses. It was really an extraordinary experience. Learned a lot. We kind of got shut down with COVID when that happened, and sort of everything kind of ground to a halt. And during that period, I transitioned to another construction company that was still operating to fill that void. And
Mm-hmm.
they did more specialty spaces. They did commercial stuff, restaurant build-outs, hotels, home theaters, recording studios, things like that, which was different. And that was really interesting, because there was a lot of science there too, because everything was acoustically engineered. So, you have to put your acoustic panel in the right place to direct the sound waves to hit the person's ears exactly where they're sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're figuring all that out and making sure everything's insulated, and, the ceiling is hanging on hangers and the floor is on springs, so the subwoofers don't, vibrate everything. And it was just different types of construction, but I learned a ton doing that. And that was really, really, really exciting. And while I was there, I was always thinking sort of like, what's the next step? What's the next plan? And I knew I'd done the sales stuff. I'd done some construction, and I was like, it'd be kind of interesting to learn more of like the finance side of the business. And so did a bunch of applications while I was working, and, got some responses, didn't get some, and, got a response from Genesis, and interviewed there, and didn't hear anything for, I don't know, several months. And I just kept working, and then got a call out of the blue, and they wanted to bring me back in for another interview. And long story short, ended up getting hired by Genesis. My background check took about 4 months. So still, kind of kept working until it was official. Um, but then moved over to Genesis as an underwriting analyst in the construction department, basically underwriting and reviewing, our loans, making sure, is this project feasible? Is this budget going to support this project? Is this person who's taking it on qualified to complete this project? That sort of thing, doing the full underwrite. Learned a ton, served under some great leaders there, and through hard work, through perseverance, through luck, and through opportune timing, sort of got promoted several times. Ended up managing the underwriting department, got promoted to vice president of the construction department, which is where I'm at now. And it's been a very successful career there, and it's been very interesting learning the finance side. And that sort of, now that I have my MBA, it's sort of being more on the business side of things, of the construction aspect, is nice. My boss and I joke a lot, we miss kind of being in the field building, but throwing on your boots and inhaling, insulation fibers and sawdust is really not something that we miss all that much. And so kind of being able to actually be in an office and go do the occasional site visit is nice. It's just a different pace. But I love it. Again, as I referenced a little while ago, I've served under great leaders, both in the military and in the civilian world. And none of my civilian bosses that I'm aware of have had any military experience at all in any of the places that I've ever worked, but they've all been extraordinary. I think they all have had really interesting and really good leadership and management traits. And I just feel like for one reason or another, I've sort of been blessed by, I've never had a crappy boss. I've always had people who were dedicated, who were inspiring, who were motivating, who were competent, who were just all the things that you want in someone who's going to lead you. For the most part, these people have had it. And so I sort of feel like I've gotten a continuation of my professional development from them. Different because, again, these are not military guys, but still, it's been very eye-opening, just every experience I've had. I wouldn't trade any of them for anything.
Well, that's awesome, man. I love that trajectory and the kind of different experiences that you had to get to where you're at today. Taking a step back, though, in that, I mean, it's not, I'm saying a step back. I mean, it could be still relevant to you today, but generally speaking, that transition period, military to civilian, anything that went on or is going on, just, changing, shifting from, being in service to being a civilian.
Yeah. And one thing I will say just about the transition is, I'm sure that 3-minute narrative that I just gave you made it sound like it was entirely successful. There were periods where there was struggle. There was periods of heartache and hardship. And some of that was inevitable. Some of that was just because I thought everything was going to be fine, because why wouldn't it be? And so it's just going to be fine. And that's not really how life always works, right? And so when I was doing my exit from the Army, they do provide a lot of resources, job search type stuff, employment assistance, how to write a resume, that sort of thing. Kind of geared more to younger kids, enlisted people, maybe someone who didn't go to college. Like, that is sort of the target audience for those programs. So I kind of took it as, well, I'm probably not going to get a lot out of this based on, the stage of life that I'm in. And so I kind of didn't take it all that seriously. And I think I probably should have. And so one thing I will say is, if you are getting out, whatever exit benefits your service offers, counseling, career counseling, job seeking, resume building, skill translation, whatever it might be, if there's a class you can take or a PowerPoint to watch or whatever it is, do it. Just take advantage of the opportunities, because that will definitely make things hopefully easier. Again, nothing is guaranteed when you're starting a new career. Effectively, you're starting over, unless you're flying a helicopter for the Army and you're going to go fly a helicopter for somebody else. You're going to have to basically learn something entirely new, right? And very few people get to basically do what they were doing in the Army in their civilian lives. It can be very related in a lot of ways, but it's obviously not the same job. So prepare for that, right? I just kind of went in there, with glossy eyes, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to go home and I'm going to start making all this money and it's going to be great. I'm going to be happy and things are just going to fall into place. And no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's heartache, there's setback, there's, realizing that the civilian world is not the military world, and you have to adapt to that, right? And there are things that you just don't even know you're going to have to change about yourself that you're going to have to change, right? I mean, I went from a place where I could tell somebody what to do and it was done exactly how I wanted it, when I wanted it, where I wanted it, and there was no question about it. And then I show up here, especially, trying to, keep a dozen real estate agents pointed the right direction. And you tell somebody, well, I need you to do this. Yeah, okay. Who are you, bro? I'm going to go and do this. And what do you do, right? And that's just such a different dynamic, right? Yeah, until you're prepared for that, you don't even really necessarily know how you're going to handle it, right? And so for me, there were times where I was looking at situations and I'm like, there are some inefficiencies here. If I could just, put on my uniform and rustle up my deep command voice and just start telling people, hey, we're going to do this, 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 we would be so much better. But you can't do that, right? And so you have to kind of get yourself in the frame of mind where it's like you're not ordering people anymore. You're encouraging them, you're developing them, you're managing and leading them, but you're not in charge in the same way that you were in the Army, right? So learning that took some time. Now, I don't know that there's anything in the transition that the Army is going to do to help you prepare for that, but maybe it has improved since I've been out of the Army for 11 years now, so maybe things have improved since then, but probably not. It's just going to be what it is. But it's be prepared for the changes, be prepared for things to be different, and take advantage of the benefits. That's really the key. Take advantage of the benefits and take a picture in front of your unit before you leave, right? Like those are the two things that I would tell you to do to make sure you have a successful career, and then also utilize whatever resources you have. And I think that's just a standard thing in life. I'd like to think that everything is based on merit and hard work, but it isn't always that way, right? So if you do have a personal connection, a family connection that's in business, owns a business, knows somebody in a field that you're interested in, whatever you can use to your advantage, you probably should. And I don't think that's strictly relevant to transitioning from the military. I think that probably applies to anybody in anything at any time, right? But if you have something that can kind of give you that leg up, take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And, I was thinking back to when you were talking about preparing for your deployment in the National Training Center and how they created the environment that really allowed you to, when you got there to Iraq, you felt like, oh, I was prepared for this. So, I think what military provides is very kind of tangible, I'll call it, like how to create your resume, give you opportunity to school, et cetera. It's almost funny. I'm thinking if they created like civilian environment and you play the part for 3 weeks, maybe that would be more psychologically, like better in terms of transitioning into to adapt to the balance of the points.
And they'd be able to do it. I think because as different as it is, right? And I made the joke about ending up in a cubicle with a computer, but at the end of the day, when you're not, if you're in an infantry or a special ops unit or something like that, it may be different. But if you're, traditional run of the mill person in the military, it's almost like a corporate job in a way. I mean, it's not exactly 9 to 5 because you start early for PT or whatever it is. But there were times, especially in my staff capacity, where you have PT at 5 a.m. or whatever it is, but then you show up at 8 o'clock, with your coffee, walking into the office, and you're sitting at a desk at a computer on Microsoft Outlook and Teams most of the day. And guess what? You go to a company, and what are they doing? You're on a computer with Microsoft Outlook and Teams most of the day. Very, very similar, but different. So that, it's could be done, I think, easily.
Right. I mean, it's largely like what you said, right? The social dynamic that changes that you have to get used to. I mean, I think it's really tough to ever presume that transitioning from military to civilian, you're going to just all of a sudden understand the difference of just civilian dynamic and interaction. So that's, I think, the key difference where veterans get caught up in. Exactly as you pointed it out, right? In terms of leading teams, military versus civilian profession. But yeah, I'd love to see that, training center for transitioning. I think that could go a long way.
I mean, military. The point of basic training, right? When anybody joins any branch of any military, they break you down so they can rebuild you in
Yeah.
the way that they want you to be. And they're great at rebuilding, breaking you down, and rebuilding you into what they want you to be. But after you're done being what they want you to be, you've kind of got to rebuild yourself into sort of what you were before. And that sort of can be challenging, right? Because you were a person that joined this service and went through this experience that completely sort of changed kind of a lot about you because you had to be broken down and rebuilt. And now all of a sudden that's no longer the case. And the Army doesn't reverse that process, right? It's like,
Right,
well, we
exactly.
broke you down, we rebuilt you how we want. Now you're leaving. Well, best of luck. You know, I hope it works out for
exactly.
you. You gotta figure that out yourself. So
Totally, yeah. Yeah, that's the gap. That's you know, I'm laughing because it's just funny to like talk about, but it's not. I mean, the reality is it's not funny for people.
It'd be funny if it
it
wasn't true, right? But it is.
Right,
So it's
right.
like,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, you just gotta.
Yeah.
But it's like we always say, right? You got to embrace the suck. You got to just sort of when things are not how they should be. You just anybody who's been in the military gets it. You just sort of okay, this sucks, but we're going to deal with it and we're going to make the best of it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens. So.
Yeah, exactly. So with where you're at today, you know, I think a lot of people can understand or relate to whether it's, you know, being a realtor, whether it's, you know, working on a job site. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand or know about the underwriting process of a job. I'm curious if you could kind of shed some light into, you know, kind of like details of how that works and what you look for a successful project.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, you know, and there is a relation because underwriting really is risk identification and risk management and mitigation, right? And a lot of what you do, especially when you're in a leadership position, as you know, I'll use just being an officer as an example, really one of your primary jobs is, you know, risk identification and mitigation. You know, where are the problems going to be? Where are the major threats, and how are we going to, you know, either eliminate, counter, or mitigate it to, you know, whatever we need to do. That's what underwriting is, right? If we're looking at a deal, we want to obviously our main goal is to protect the company, you know, keep our portfolio well balanced. We don't want to lose money. That's first and foremost it. And so we just have to identify, okay, where are the risk points? Where's the, you know, the likely key points of failure? And if we identify them, is it possible to mitigate it? Is it possible to eliminate it? Is it possible to just acknowledge that it's there, monitor it, but still proceed? Or is it such a thing that, you know, this is probably something we need to escalate and maybe something we don't want to necessarily get involved with, right? So in that sense, it's kind of like coming up with a battle plan or you know, an order for a training exercise. You've got to go through all of your facts. You've got to look at the whole situation. What do you have in front of you? What are you trying to accomplish? What is being presented? And identify where are the gaps, where are the lags, where are the issues, where are the potential, you know, single points of failure that are going to doom a whole project, and then how do you fix that, right? Because my personal philosophy, you know, when I'm underwriting a deal is, and it's kind of funny because my wife is an underwriter, but she works in insurance. Their frame of mind is basically try to find a reason to not do it, and then we're not going to do it, right? Because that's what insurance is. They don't want to cover anything where there's even a minuscule chance of losing money. I look at things totally different because we are in a business of making money, right? So it's like when I'm looking at a deal, whatever it is, a house, an apartment building, anything that someone wants to build, renovate, whatever it is, I look at it and it's like, if there's a risk factor that I've identified, okay, this has got an issue, but we're also here to fund deals that have issues and make money. So can we overcome this? And I believe, and I've trained my team to feel this way too, that don't just come up to an obstacle or a risk or a threat and stop, right? How do you overcome it, right? So if we underwrite the loan and approve it, when it gets to fund control and, you know, dollar disbursement, can we mitigate it there? Can we implement maybe extra controls on our fund control process to limit that risk? And oftentimes we can, right? If you're worried that, you know, these guys are too aggressive or whatever, and they're way ahead of their project and they don't, you know, they're way farther along than they've been, you know, billing for, or the opposite. How do we get them kind of balanced and in line? There are ways you can control things like that rather than just throwing up your hands and not doing a deal necessarily. So I always say, look at the risk, analyze the risk, understand the risk, and then find a way to counter the risk. And that's what underwriting is. I mean, that really is it. Yes, there's check the box type stuff, right? We need to have this for the file. We need to make sure this is notated in our system of record. Fine. Like, a computer honestly could do a lot of that stuff. That's not really hard thought, where you need a certain skill set. Where you need the skill set is really in identifying what is the risk and how do you mitigate it. And the former head of our construction department who hired me, that was what he always said in any situation. And it was almost, work related or not. When I would take him an issue or a situation, the first words out of his mouth would be, well, okay, what's the risk? That's what it comes down to, right? What is the risk to the company, to you, to whoever is involved, and have you dealt with it? And those are lessons that have just, I had that frame of mind, from the Army, but then getting that from a civilian boss who did not have military experience, it was kind of like, okay, I'm on the right track here. This is the right way to look at it, and that's how I'm going to continue to look at it. So that's the way I approach it. I mean, again, everybody's different. My wife, like I said, they find risk, and that sort of, it's like, okay, stop, we're done. There's a risk factor. We're not going any farther. Maybe that works for them. I'm sure it does. The company she works for is extraordinarily successful, so they're doing something right? But for our business, we need to fund loans. That's what we're doing. I also enjoy, funding deals and seeing them go from, blueprint to fruition, being involved in it, whether I'm actually involved in the construction or just involved in facilitating, the finance for it. It's still cool to see something tangible come from something that you've worked on. There is an end result that you could see, like, oh wow, I was part of that, and that's kind of cool. So I enjoy it for that, and I enjoy it just for being able to kind of, look at it as, a risk officer, an operations and plans officer, and try to figure out, okay, here's the mission in front of us. We've got to get this deal across the board and get it funded. That's our mission. So now what do we need to do? And it's, we need these documents. We need to review this, this, and this. I want to see the full plan set. I want to see a budget on this. I want to see the sub-trade contracts for these, vendors. Whatever it is that I need to see to make myself feel comfortable, that's fine. But it's like coming up with a battle plan, right? Each loan is different, which is also cool because every project we do is different, right? And at the company where I'm at Genesis, I mean, we do fix and flip of little, single family homes. We build ground up apartment buildings. We do master plan communities. We do mobile home park. We do everything, right? So everyone is different. So it's kind of like in the military, each mission, while they may be similar, each one is different, right? A raid is a raid, but it's also not, right? Because whatever target is changes the dynamic. The environment changes the dynamic. The time, the day, the place changes the dynamic. So even though you're doing the same thing, it's really not the same thing. And so each one of our loans, while it's kind of the process is the same and the overall function is the same, each one is different. Each one has their own complexities. Each one has their own things to consider. I'm much more worried about the ground on something in Florida than I might be for something somewhere else just because of the prevalence of sinkholes, right? So anything has its own little unique issues that you have to take into consideration. And that just kind of, that's the saving grace that makes it not be the same thing every single day, because otherwise it would be almost like the same thing every single day and it would get kind of boring. But we have sort of that where like each deal we get to review and underwrite poses its own unique set of challenges, its own unique set of risks, and its own unique set of, solutions. And we're very solution oriented. And obviously, I think that is one of the skill sets being a veteran is being results focused, being mission focused, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how, what, who, no one really cares. At the end of the day, it just has to get done. And as long as we get it done, then we're succeeding. And that's why I always tell people, hire a veteran. If you want somebody who will get your job done at the end of the day, regardless of just about anything else, that's the person who's not going to quit on you, right? So
yeah. Totally. Well said, man. Out of curiosity, in that kind of process of, understanding risk, is there like an SOP that goes along with, okay, this is typically what we're looking at. Obviously, there are going to be variables per the specifics of that, potential job or that job. But is there at least some kind of like template that you're
I mean,
using against
we
it.
make ones, and we have
Okay.
living documents that sort of go as we go, right? Because you
Yeah,
learn
that's what I
something
mean.
new
Yeah.
every day, right? And so we will
Yeah.
adapt that into our policy. A lot of
Right.
it just comes from experience, right? After you've seen the same thing 7 times, maybe you're going to see it an eighth time, and so you prepare yourself for it, right? And there are certain, standard things that we do, right? I mean, when you're underwriting a construction loan, obviously you want to review a plan set, you want to look at a budget, you want to make sure that the budget supports whatever they're trying to build, that it's
Right.
capitalized enough that they're going to be able to get it done. That's standard across the board. Like, that will not change no matter what you're looking at. But then there's all
Right.
the other factors, right? Is it in Florida? Is it going to be a sinkhole? Is it, on the side of a mountain on a cliffhanger that could, fall down? Are you going to have to drill caissons, 300 feet into the ground? What's going to be involved with that? If they're building in New York and they're building, a new building in between two buildings, there's a whole host of issues you have to do just to, do soundproofing and waterproofing in between the two buildings. You can't, knock down the neighbor's wall while you're trying to build. All kinds of things like that you have to take into consideration. Every municipality has different regulations, rules,
Right.
regarding what you can and can't do, what you can and can't finance. We have different laws regarding liens and clear titles depending on what state they're in, what county they're in, right? So, and we lend in, I mean, not all 50 states, but I'm pretty sure a vast majority of them. And every place is different, right? Some places you have to be a general contractor to build. Some states you don't have to be a general contractor to build. Some states you need to have a full plan set. Some states you don't, right? And so you're trying to evaluate a deal that doesn't really have what you would think of as a plan set because they're not required to have one. So what the hell do you look at, right? And it just, so you have
Yeah.
to adapt and think on your feet, right? And we still see things every day, right? We'll do our first loan in a new market, and it's like, oh my God, wow, what is this? I've never seen this. Doing deals in New York specifically, New York City is very unique. They have a whole host of requirements, both on the construction side, on the finance side, on the insurance side, on the tax side, that like you have to just be aware of, because if we do something that we shouldn't do, it can, cause problems for us or a client or anybody else. So, yes, we have SOPs, we have manuals that sort of encompass some of that stuff.
Right.
But a lot of it is just sort of retained through experience. And that's sort of, I think that's the way life is, right? A lot of stuff, a
Right.
lot
Yeah.
of places, it's in here more than it is written down. That's not unique to me, to the company I'm at, or any of the companies I've ever been at, or even the Army. I mean, the Army, yes, we have SOPs for everything, but a lot of stuff is just people know what they know, and you just assume sometimes
Right.
that everybody knows what you know, and so there's sometimes a gap of things, and that causes issues, right? Because I've
Right.
done things in my civilian life where it's like, in situation A, you're supposed to do B. So I come to situation A and I do B, and then someone comes and it's like, well, wait, didn't you know about this? This was supposed to be C. And I'm like, well, okay,
Right.
where was that written down? Well, no, it's not, but like, that's just what it is. And it's like, well, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
now I know, but how the hell was I supposed to know that beforehand, right? And so
Right.
you overcome that, and it's just, I mean, that's why I guess they say experience has value. Sometimes you just need to do it enough to just be able to know what you're
Right.
looking at, and know what you don't know, and know what you need to ask.
Yeah, I mean, you answer that in a great way. I guess the better word, as I was trying to like think of how to ask it, would be like framework, right? Meaning it doesn't have to be so literal. Rather, it's just like some kind of boundary of, okay, this is like what definitely doesn't make sense. This is like tracking toward making sense. And then, I mean, really everything you said was,
And I
that
like
makes
to
total
have
sense. Yeah.
flexibility, right? Because there always should be
Right.
flexibility, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even in the military, now the military, there's more flexibility, right? But there's almost always guardrails to some extent, right? You can kind of do whatever you want to do, but you just can't go too far this way, and you can't go too far this way. Now,
Right.
maybe the military in some situations has more leeways of going outside the guardrails when you need to than a civilian world might, but still, I like to have guardrails, and this is how I train all of my teams and anybody who works for me. It's like, these are the parameters. Don't go too far
Yeah.
left. Don't go too far right. If you're within the zone, do what you think is best, accomplish the task at hand, and get it done. Just stay within the parameters we have set. limits on, whatever it is, based on whatever it is, right? We can't do this for legal reasons. We can't do this for ethical reasons.
Right.
We can't do this for whatever it is. This is just not something we do for corporate policy, whatever. Those are our guardrails. Stay within the guardrails, get it done. But I also encourage flexibility. I encourage creativity, because that's how you get accomplishments, right? You have to be unique, you have to be different, you have to be creative, but you have to stay within the rules. And sometimes it's getting the guardrails clear. What are the actual limits that I can operate in? And that's what I always tell my supervisors, my bosses, and my managers. I'm like, if you want me to be most effective, you just have to tell me, don't go too far left here, don't go too far right here, but as long as you're within that, have at it and get the job done. And if I can operate in that manner, then I'll usually be able to do kind of what I need to do with very little to no supervision. And my team operates the same way. I mean, they're almost entirely independent. I step in when I need to, but I've trained them to look at it in the way that I would look at it. And I think that is just, I think we've been as successful as we have been because of that. And I think a lot of that comes from serving in the Army.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great management advice, man. Like that tracks and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, in closing out the civilian professional part of the show, of your story, I want to give you the opportunity to plug. I mean, we've mentioned a lot, right? But to give advice now specifically on translatable skills, military to civilian profession.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of people struggle, right? I mean, if the Army is great with weird skills. It's great with funny acronyms and words that doesn't mean anything to anybody else, right? So you could be the best person at disassembling an M203, but what the hell does that mean to somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about, right? So you have to find ways to translate those skills. But at the heart of it, there are some, inherent skills that I think anybody who has served in the military has, right? And we talked about sort of being decisive, right? Being mission focused, right? We're results focused, we're results oriented, we want to accomplish the mission. People who serve in the military are decisive, right? You have to take action, you have to make a decision, and once you make a decision, you have to follow through on it. I mean, yes, there are exceptions, but typically once you decide something, you stick with your plan, right? Whether it goes to shit or not, you're committed. There's no backtrack, there's no second go around. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing. Once you take that first step, you're taking the second step, so you might as well just commit to it. That I think is a skill that helps people out. Obviously we're trained leaders, even whether you're enlisted or an officer. Everybody who has served in the military has led somebody at something at some point, and that's a huge skill set. And then of course the ethics, the integrity, doing the right thing, even when nobody's looking, all of those values that they instill, when you're going through military training is that, right? So when you hire a veteran, right, and talking about valuable skills, you get someone who's trustworthy with high integrity. You get someone who's committed, who's hardworking. You get someone who knows how to lead, who knows how to manage. You get someone who is committed to something beyond just their personal satisfaction. And you get somebody who is resilient and adaptable. Because if you survive a career of any length in the military, you are resilient and adaptable. You have to be able to make it through the good, the bad, the nonsense, everything that's involved in being in the military that you go through, whether it's a training or a combat environment. You've got to just be able to adapt to sitting in a parking lot for 12 hours in the cold, or mowing the parade grass with a pair of nail clippers because that's what somebody thought would be a great thing to do, right? You just have to be resilient enough to handle it. So those skills, I think, are inherent to every single veteran. But then there's also the unique skills, right? Those are the ones that you have to figure out, if you're the fastest guy disassembling a Mike 203, how do you translate that into something useful? Now maybe you can phrase that as, you have a good understanding of machine functions and how to assemble and disassemble complex, whatever it is, you come up with a way to couch it and phrase it to sell yourself, which is why I said, if there is ever resume writing or skill translation services available when you're exiting out, go for that. Because, if you're an infantryman and you know how to kick down a door and lead a stack into a house, that's great. But how is that going to help you applying to be, a project manager at, a beverage company? It probably doesn't, right? But there are definite skills in that person that would be relevant to that beverage company, and it's just being able to sell yourself, number one, which is half the battle, is selling yourself as a veteran. But then also the other half is those people on the civilian side recognizing those skills, a lot of the
Mhm.
ones that I just mentioned, that veterans do bring to the table: the resilience, the adaptability, the discipline, the integrity, the follow through, those types of things. The more that people recognize what veterans bring to the table, I think the more focus on hiring veterans we will see. But again, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of systems in place for that. I feel like short of a professional, headhunting recruiting company that's maybe catered towards veterans, if you're just trying to do this by yourself, you're kind of by yourself, because you've got to figure it out on your own, and the companies don't necessarily know what they're looking for. They may think like, oh, I've heard hiring a veteran is good, but they don't necessarily know why. They don't know, because of those skills that we just talked about. This is why you want to hire a veteran. This is why this is what they're gonna bring to the table. It's not just about being able to say, oh, we have a veteran, that's cool. We're gonna celebrate that. We're, diverse. No, they're actually really beneficial people to the organization. And I think Genesis is hopefully benefiting that from me, and I'm not the only veteran. There's other guys at the company who've served in the Army. We have some guys who've been in the IDF, so we have veterans on our team, and I would throw out a guess that maybe that is partially responsible for why we're as successful as we are. I mean, I'd like to think so. We're all hardworking guys, and girls,
Mhm.
and we're trying to demonstrate that and bring that to the civilian world. So there are those good skills that veterans have. And at the end of the day, we are team players, right? You can't be in the military if you're not a team player, right? There's no I in team. You got to work with everybody. And, from the melting pot that we talked about of the military to just having to work together to accomplish the mission, we're team players, and that really helps. You don't want a bunch of people who are just in it for themselves to try to get ahead. That's not going to be successful for any organization. And having people who are there to benefit the organization is hugely helpful, and you will get that with a veteran.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, very, very well said. I appreciate all that
Absolutely.
advice, and I'm sure it'll be helpful for, all listeners, whether they're a veteran or someone, in a civilian profession that can, embrace what you just said and apply to, how they hire and how they perceive veterans. So that's awesome, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So closing out the show, we got our last two questions. Let's start with wellness practice. What does that look like for you?
So yeah, so wellness, I think, is very important, and it was not something I took seriously for many years of my life, in the Army and out of it. But as I'm getting older, I'm approaching 40 now, so things are a little bit different. It is important. I have wellness regimes that I do every day, right? And some of it is very simple. Um, just going outside for a certain amount of time to be in the sun,
Hmm.
right? Drinking enough water, staying active, right? So I try to work out as often as I can. Not every day. I told myself when I got out of the Army I wasn't going to do PT every day anymore. Like, that was just going to go away from my life, and it did. But I still try to do it periodically. But you got to also work your mind, right? So I start almost every day with a couple of brain teasers. I have apps on my phone, so I'll do Wordle, I'll do a crossword puzzle, I'll do something like that to just kind of get my mind sort of
Hmm.
working the way I want it to work. Even before I have a cup of coffee or anything like that, I kind of start off the day with that. When I'm feeling stressed, I'll use something like the Calm app, and I'll get like a meditative thing going on and just do like a
Hmm.
5 minute breathe and meditate, just sort of recenter yourself and calm down. I've found that when I'm super stressed, is hugely helpful in just getting me to come back down, get back to reality, and get back into what I need to do. So those types of exercises I really support. I was musically inclined as a kid. I was a drummer. I have a drum set in my house, so even playing 15, 20 minutes of drums,
Mhm.
it's physically active, it's mentally active. You get all your endorphins going. So I try to incorporate that into my routine as often as I can. But really, eat healthy, drink enough water, exercise, get some vitamin D from the sun, and have something that levels you. Whether it's meditative things, whether it's listening to rain or a thunderstorm, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's working out, whatever it is for you to kind of keep you centered. Is good, and always try to expand your mind. I mean, that's one of the reasons why
Mhm.
I do the brain teasers. It's just I want to be functioning on as many cylinders as I can, just to be as successful as I can, and anything I can do to kind of kickstart the activity up there and sort of get me going in the right direction is helpful. And since I've been doing that, I think I seem a little bit smarter. I seem a little bit more kind of like understanding of what's going on. I notice things faster. Pattern analysis and things like that has improved for me since I've started doing that. So um, yeah, I think that's been
Yeah,
really helpful.
that's awesome, man. I love how you bring up really easy tasks that are, yeah, I guess, not what people would generally consider when you say wellness. And that is why I appreciate what you said, is because it allows for people to hear and understand, all right, there's these quick, tools that you can use, and a variety of different tools or hobbies that you
Mm-hmm.
can do for wellness. So that's an awesome answer,
And
man.
a lot of these things don't cost a lot of money. They don't
Right.
cost a lot of time, right? It's very easy. It's something anybody can do in 2 or 3 minutes. Go sit outside, close your eyes, center yourself for
Hmm.
a few minutes, and cost you nothing. So,
Totally. Totally. Yep. Well said. So last question is, any book or books you'd like to recommend?
uh, yeah, not necessarily specific books. First and foremost, I would encourage everybody to read, right? I don't think enough people
Hmm.
read anymore. I have hundreds of books. If I were to take you guys downstairs, I have a whole library with shelves of books. I grew up in a family of people who loved to read and had reading time as a kid where I could do nothing but read. So it was sort of forced on me, but I think it's very
It's
beneficial
good.
because it's just yes, you can learn a lot watching TV, right? And I watch the Science Channel, the Military History Channel, and all that, and I learn things from that, Smithsonian, whatever it is. But you also just need to read. There's a difference you get from reading and how the information I feel like gets absorbed when you read it versus you watching it. I think
Hmm.
is beneficial. Now, me personally, generally, what I read tends to fall into military and political history, being a political science major and a military guy. I read a lot of World War II history. I read a lot of
Hmm.
obviously Iraq and Afghanistan history and biographical things. So like I've read books on Winston Churchill by Winston Churchill, books by many of our military leaders, David Petraeus, Tommy
Hmm.
Franks, generals from the wars, what are their thoughts? Ray Odierno, those types of people, I read books on them. All of Bob Woodward's books on basically every administration since I guess probably Bill Clinton that he's written about. I read all of those. That's sort of my educational book. I also sometimes will nerd out and pull out books from my college or graduate school and just sort of start looking through those just to kind of refresh me on some concepts. I'm sure most people probably would not find that to be very exciting, and I get that, but that's just something that I do. And yes, every once in a while, I will incorporate, a paperback murder mystery or something like that, just to kind of have a thoughtless sort of reading session, right, where you can
Hmm.
just kind of escape somewhere. I don't really read a lot of fantasy type books. That's not really my thing. I read the Harry Potter books; those were great, but I'd rather see the movies just because that's just not what I want to read about. I want to see it. Um, but no, a lot of history, a lot of analysis, political, military analysis, a lot of business
Hmm.
books. I read about the economy and absorbing also news. I read a lot of news articles from a variety of different sources. So I'll go on to CNBC, get some finance stuff. I'll read the Wall Street Journal. I'll go on to the BBC, whatever it is, just to get different views on different things and read articles about the economy, about travel, about business, about politics, about war, whatever's going on, just to be informed, and
Hmm.
B, just to learn. I mean, you read a book, regardless of what it is, you'll learn something. If nothing else, you're going to learn a new word that you didn't know before. because you'll come across it and you won't know what it means, and you have to look it up, and then you learn. So just
Totally
doing
with you.
that, I think, is extraordinarily beneficial to people. It just makes
Mhm.
you more intelligent, it makes you more competent, and it makes you seem more intelligent and more competent. And even if you aren't, as long as you can seem like it, sometimes that can be enough to maybe get you where you need to be, right? So pick up a book, turn off the TV every once in a while, pick up a book, read something. I think it's hugely helpful, whatever interests you, because you can't read something that just doesn't interest you, which is why
Yeah.
maybe most people won't pick up their old textbooks. But find something you like and read, just to stretch your eyes, stretch your mind, learn some vocab. I think it's helpful.
Yeah, well said, man. I appreciate your kind of breadth of willingness to read in terms of categories and topics. So that's awesome.
Well, I thank my parents for instilling that in me from a very young age. So
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a good
absolutely.
one. Awesome. All right, Nick, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Really
Oh,
appreciate you sharing
thank
your
you.
story.
Thank you for having this. I think
Mm.
this is hugely beneficial for a variety of people who are in the military, people who are getting out of the military, people who were in and are now out, and people who maybe are looking to hire somebody. I think could
Mhm.
benefit from this. I think a lot of people in the HR field should listen to some episodes of this show and realize the benefits that veterans bring to the table and I mean, this was obviously centered sort of on real estate construction and that sort of thing, but any
Mhm.
field, any industry, anything at all can benefit from this podcast. And I think people should just take note of the fact that while we're only 1% of the population, we're out there, we're hungry, we're looking for opportunities. Someone getting out of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, whatever it is, they're looking for a new home, a new place to be, a new place to fit in, and they bring a hell of a lot to the table. And everyone would benefit from making those connections happen. So anybody who sees this, if one person benefits from it, if one veteran has a slightly easier transition, or if one more former soldier gets hired at a job, then this was hugely successful, and we owe that to you for creating that and bringing this out and affording us the opportunity. So I can't thank you enough for that.
Thanks so much, man. Thank you for saying that. You saying that is the purpose of why I have this show, and I really appreciate hearing that versus me being the one to say it.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
that's awesome, man. Thanks so
Absolutely.
much.
It's been
Appreciate you.
great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.